folks will be introduced in a second, but I know at CSMA this is a huge issue, cybersecurity. Ransomware, I talked to somebody a year ago that had ransomware attack them, and that was it's really devastating for an organization. So I'm sort of going to get into some of that and be ready for a great session. And let me introduce Henry Young, who's the moderator for today. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm Henry Young. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to start by just telling you real briefly about my organization, BSA, the Software Alliance, and the Digital Transformation Network, and then we're really going to get into listening to our experts about cybersecurity. We're going to kind of cover the context that construction companies are working in, the context kind of more generally, and then concerns that we're hearing from customers. So I'm Henry, I work at BSA. BSA represents enterprise software companies. So these are companies that sell your company's products and services, and you are aware and work with many of them already. So these are companies like Microsoft, Cisco, Oracle, IBM, SAP. They obviously provide quite a broad range of services. Then we have companies like Salesforce, right, for customer relations management, Workday, and then we have companies that work specifically in the construction space, where you'll hear from today, Bentley and Autodesk. And then we also run the Digital Transformation Network, which is a cross-sector group of companies that are really interested in driving digital transformation. You know, construction is not done today like it was 5, 10, or 25 years ago. That's true across all sectors. In many sectors that has been driven also by the pandemic, right, where there's been a faster pace of digital transformation. And so that's kind of the perspective that we take, trying to find, trying to represent companies that are just providing solutions to other businesses. With that said, what I'd like to do is turn to our panelists, and I'll have them introduce themselves, say a couple of words about the company they work for, and then we'll kind of get into the substance. And the first person I'm going to turn to is Allie. Actually, no, it's Teresa. So we're going to talk to Teresa. Sorry. We're going to talk to Teresa. And here, what I'm wondering about is, like, what is the general context in which companies around the world are dealing with cybersecurity challenges?
Yeah, so my name is Teresa Lanowitz. Thanks everybody for coming today. And I'm head of cybersecurity evangelism with AT&T. Now, most people know AT&T, but most people do not know that AT&T has a very robust cybersecurity business. So the only thing I'm going to mention about AT&T cybersecurity is we offer 2 ways to engage with our clients. The first is through consulting services. The second is through managed security services for network, endpoint, and managed detection and response and extended detection and response. So what I do at AT&T Cybersecurity is I'm head of evangelism and thought leadership, and every year what I am responsible for is the publication of this report, the AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report. It's a vendor-neutral, forward-looking report about where cybersecurity is going. So to answer your question, Henry, the big thing is that people are looking at now is we are poised on into a new era of computing. It's one that is really about experience. It's one that is about data-driven, and it's one about having security at the core of everything you're doing. So we're moving away from these typical types of monolithic applications that are really tethered with our traditional types of compute devices like laptops, desktops, phones, tablets, and so on, to moving to the edge. And so when you hear the word edge, everybody defines edge differently. If you're a vendor, you define it towards the tech stack that you're selling. If you're a user, you define it towards the tech stack that you're using. So when we use edge, and we talk about edge in this report extensively, what we mean is something that is software defined. The data, the applications, the workloads, the hosting, it's closer to where the data is being generated and consumed. And it's a distributed model of management, intelligence, and networks. So those are the 3 characteristics that make up edge. So when you think about edge, everybody's probably used edge computing in some way, shape, or form. Think about when you go into a public parking structure. You go to floor 1 and it says there are 200 spaces, but there are only 3 spaces available. And you say, do I really want to drive around and look for that, or for those 3 empty spaces, or should I go to the second level? So you go up to the second level and there are 200 spaces and 100 available. And you say, this is a much better chance of finding a parking spot here. So that's edge. So it's data that is communicating with you in near real time, giving you information. So that's where really the industry is headed. But what's also happening is the endpoints are changing. And if we look around at this particular vertical market in construction, endpoints are changing rapidly. Everything is connected to the internet. So everything has to be protected and secured because there are long-term consequences if it's not, or short-term consequences in terms of types of attacks. And I can talk about some of the attack types that we're seeing later on. But from a high-level perspective, we're moving away from monolithic computing, we're moving to the edge, and people are really aware of security concerns. And the pandemic really drove that. The pandemic accelerated the movement of security being something some really smart people over in the corner do and they take care of, and all I know is they protect me, to security is now a business enabler, it's a business initiative. So you won't hear anybody talk about any type of new application, any type of new project without putting security at the center. So that's really where we are today.
Thanks, that's important. I'm just gonna throw it to the audience. If people are interested in asking questions while we go through this, raise your hand or maybe just walk up to the front here, and we are happy to take questions as we go, and we'll work through, and then we'll kind of make some more connections. So now I do want to turn to Allie. And what I'm really wondering about is what you're seeing as market drivers in security, what customers are thinking and how businesses are responding.
Yeah, absolutely, Henry. So hi everyone, my name is Allison Scott, you can call me Allie. I'm the Director of Customer Experience and Industry Advocacy for Autodesk, and I work specifically in the construction team, which means I'm really focusing on how we help you get the most value out of your investment when you're moving to the cloud and using cloud-based construction management solutions. Autodesk provides a construction management solution called Autodesk Construction Cloud, and we have a number of modules inside of that platform that help you collaborate, communicate, manage quantity takeoffs, cost, and all your project management capabilities. So as you can imagine, what Teresa was talking about, there's a lot of computing power happening behind the scenes for Autodesk Construction Cloud, and there's a lot of data being infused in the way that our customers are using that platform today. Now, when it comes to construction, I talk to customers almost every single day. In fact, I came from the industry. I spent almost 15 years in the built environment before I joined Autodesk, and helping to understand the connection points and the intersections between technology and what's happening both in the office and in the field. What we're seeing in terms of market drivers for construction is there's a couple of things happening. One, we have never been more digitized right now in construction than in the history of construction. I think everyone in this room probably feels that. There's wonderful things happening with technology in construction. There's also some really scary things, and it's putting people at a lot of tension. But we see massive growth in the use of digital construction tools. In fact, during the pandemic, which Teresa also mentioned, we saw over a 300% growth of people moving to cloud-based project management solutions. In less than a year, it was massive, right? Our whole industry was forced to change. And that momentum has continued. So that's for one. The second thing that's happening is there's a massive growth of new technologies entering the market. There's $10 billion worth of startup venture capital-backed funding that went into tech startups specifically for the built environment in the last 5 years. That is really exciting, but it also means there's a lot of third-party applications out there that don't necessarily have all of the security layers that you might be looking for. So it also means that people are using a lot of technologies that don't necessarily talk to each other or have all the right back-end layers behind them. And the third thing that's happening that's a market driver for cybersecurity and construction is there's a big growth in really using cybersecurity as a business opportunity, as a competitive edge. And I love that Teresa mentioned this too, so this is like perfect. We're going right out for each other. If you take, for instance, the infrastructure bill, the IIJA bill, that the grants of which are starting to roll out right now, the administration recognized the importance of digital construction and using more technology to enable projects that are coming out of IIJA. In fact, there's a $100 million program to help the states use more digital construction technology as a part of the grants that are coming out of the IIJA. Embedded in that language is also requirements around cybersecurity. So if you want to compete as a modern construction business, you're going to need to have some really clear goals and really clear strategies around digital construction and cybersecurity. So those are some big things that are driving the industry.
Thanks. I'm just going to look out for questions. Again, don't feel shy. We can always detour to talk about the things that you guys care about. But in the context of, we now have like a broad context from Teresa, what's happening just generally in the world, and then what are the driving market forces? I want to turn to Ryan to talk about, what does this mean for companies that are actually doing the work? And I think that perspective is obviously very important in this conversation.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, my name is Ryan Anderson. I'm the Director of Strategy and Portfolio for Construction Equipment at CNH Industrial. CNH Industrial has a couple of different brands. They have Case Construction Equipment, New Holland Construction Equipment. And in my role, what I'm doing is I'm trying to take a look at the overall landscape and help put together plans for the future. So looking out 5 years, 10 years, what do we need to consider as far as in the architecture of our equipment, and where do we need to invest? So as far as the cybersecurity concerns are concerned, basically we've got different levels of autonomy within our equipment. And as we have them more and more connected, we have them more and more connected to steering systems, braking systems, there's more implications if we do have someone that was to get into our equipment in a malicious way. So, as we move forward, we have an eye to that, to prevent people getting into debugging screens or things like that, putting in hardware modules to prevent access to the machines. It's going to be interesting going forward. Actually, in Europe, we have cybersecurity regulation that's going to be coming into effect in the 2026 timeframe. So we'll be looking at that. What are some of the requirements from logging potential events? How does that need to be reported? And having that information go back to governmental agencies. Not something that is a regulation right now in the U.S., but something that we have an eye on as we move forward in the future.
And then I guess we'll kind of round up what I think is actually quite a nice cycle here with Bill, and I'd like for you to provide your perspective on what companies are actually doing on the software to make sure it's secure. Obviously, we hope that customers are paying attention to the security that their vendors provide. And so since you're kind of focused on that, if you could share a little bit about Bentley and your view from software security.
Sure. My name is Bill McNamara. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for Bentley Systems, specifically on our software called Synchro. It's a software that is used by VDC planners, foremen, project managers, boots on the ground. The entire infrastructure of that project can be run on our systems. And with that, the move to the cloud, I originally was on the client-server side, the thick clients. And the biggest move I've seen over the last decade is moving to the cloud, taking advantage of that distributed computing. And over that period of time, the attack vectors have significantly changed. Instead of, like was mentioned earlier, instead of providing a software that is a monolithic that you have to upgrade continuously and hopefully you don't get out of date on it, we now have cloud software. The cloud software can be updated if we need to daily. The benefit of that is we're now building microservice architecture. In essence, my team is responsible for building a layer of microservices that get compiled into multiple services that roll up into a portfolio. So in doing that, we have very, very strict guidelines. We are SOC 2 certified, and in that certification, it's not just what we're doing with the hardware and software, it's what we're doing with the people, how we behave, how people are trained, what they do. So you can imagine from a software development point of view, there's many, many people touching the code. You start with peer review. Nothing gets into the system that some other developer hasn't done peer review. You have security champions per service. Those security champions then have an AppSec team that oversees them. And then we employ people to actually attack the system. So in having this stuff in the cloud and managed by professionals rather than people within the office, the problems I've seen in the past were around people failing to change passwords on routers, people failing to do stuff, or even worse, providing physical access. Oh, that's nice. Providing physical access to the machine where they could put in a thumb drive and do something maliciously. Now that's been taken away. You don't have that in your organization where people can do that. And the benefit is we have professional organizations in these cloud services that are managing them, and they're watching the attack vectors like she mentioned. But from my point of view, I have to translate the need for security and all of the things that my security team would like to do, and balance that with the behaviors, how people want to use the product. Because you don't want to log in every 5 minutes. My security team would like you to log in every 15 minutes. But there's not a chance anybody's going to tolerate that. So the idea about how long the certificates last, how long the tokens last, that's all stuff that we negotiate with our team. We make sure that we get the best for you out of it. But as the attack vectors have changed, the most significant one that I've seen changed was about a decade ago, we were always concerned about how penetration was going to come in, how people were going to get into your system. Now, we're just as concerned about bad actors. So the behaviors of how people work, walking away from a workstation while it's still turned on and logged in, that's a major problem because somebody could slip into your computer while you're getting coffee. So if you don't know, Windows L on your computer locks your screen in a second and then you can walk away. But it's those human behaviors. People, if we make the passwords too complex, we find they write them down. And then what's the point? So we're really, as my role is, we have to make sure, one, our software is very secure, but we also have to make sure that we're providing the means and methods that people will behave properly and make sure people are educated about that.
Yeah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on what Bill was talking about. So this whole idea of your applications being secure, that's something that we really, really need to be focused on. And as Ellie mentioned, we're moving to the cloud. I think we all can agree we're moving to the cloud. And what we found in our report is that cybersecurity controls, people are looking to combine those cybersecurity controls with network functions. And right now, across the board, it's sort of a 50-50 split, whether that is in the cloud or on-prem. But we're seeing rapid movement to the cloud. But getting back to application security, if you think about how your applications are going to be changing in the future, using all of these different endpoints communicating with one another versus you as an individual working with a particular application, your application development is going to start changing. You're going to start to see more applications that are headless, meaning they're not graphical user interface based or GUI based. So they're headless apps that are communicating to one another, machine-to-machine communication, all about that data. So application security testing is one of those big things that we'll start to see a lot of in the next couple of years, I hope. I've been saying this since 2002 when I was an analyst, and we haven't seen much movement. But now that we are having this big change in compute paradigm, we should start to see more application security. So you may hear of it as DevSecOps or SecDevOps. It's about making sure that your developers are building security in from the beginning rather than waiting for something to happen at the end. And this idea of saying, okay, in the past we have waited for something to happen at the end. What we found in our research is that there's now this alignment between the line of business and security. And what we found is that 75% of our survey respondents out of 1,520 people, 75% said, yes, we think there's a big risk to what we're doing in the future. And we also know that there is a business impact. Now, you look at that and you say, wow, that might be kind of frightening, but really what it is it's very reassuring because the line of business is now understanding the impact that a security breach can actually have. Whether it is through a network breach, whether it's through an application breach, they understand that if something is breached, there is a big, big business impact. And that's changed dramatically over the past 5 years. So that's a really important point, I think, to take away. And what it means is that your technical people, your cybersecurity people, and your line of business people really need to be aligned. And what we're also starting to see is those silos that have been built up. That app dev team, that networking team, that operations team, those silos are starting to erode because the line of business is saying, we need to move forward with some innovative style of computing to get better business differentiation, to get a more of a competitive advantage. So moving forward, the line of business is saying, they're kind of driving that, but they're saying we're not going to move forward unless we are in lockstep with the security team. So that's something completely different from what we've seen over the past 3 to 5 years, and that's very encouraging.
Yeah, so just to pick up a couple things. One thing that you mentioned, Teresa, was kind of like the SecDevOps. I'm sure people have heard this, the secure by design rather than security bolted on afterwards. This is something that I think is worth noting, particularly because the White House released its U.S. National Cyber Strategy last week or 2 weeks ago. And Secure by Design is one of the kind of focuses of that strategy, where the U.S. government and its vendors should be kind of prioritizing that. And another piece that I think is probably worth highlighting for this group that came out of the National Cyber Strategy and a number of other kind of comments by the administration is really about pushing cybersecurity risk management up to the C-suite. So this is not, cybersecurity is not just something your IT team does. Granted, your CEO is not going to be, resetting your password, right? But they should be really thinking about how they're managing cybersecurity risk. And so it should be integrated across the organization, which again is kind of echoing that idea. I'm happy we got the lights on. I'm also happy that no one was actually asleep in the back of the room at 9:30, so happy/surprised. Again, I'm gonna keep saying this, but if, we're here to kind of describe what's going on, highlight the things we think should be prioritized, but if you have any cybersecurity questions, don't be shy about stepping up or raising a hand. We will be happy to answer them, and we have one here.
Yeah, so for the panel, I've got a question on IoT connected construction equipment, on-the-ground stuff that's connected to the cloud. Are there any industry standards that you would refer to that are kind of being developed for construction type equipment?
Okay, so just so folks in the back who might not have been able to hear, the question was about IoT devices that are connected to the cloud and whether there are standards or industry best practices for how you would secure those IoT devices. Anyone want to jump in?
That's your world, man.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking about that. I mean, there is a best practices,
Excuse me, there is a best practices guide out there. There's not any regulation right now concerning that. So yeah, nothing, I guess, enforceable from that perspective.
So that's right, there are, as far as I know, no laws that would require you to do something. Is anyone here familiar with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology? Good, I see some hands, I used to work there, so that kind of makes me feel good. So NIST does actually a bunch of things in construction. One of the things it does is kind of materials measurement and also guidelines that states can adopt as they're building up building codes. But another thing it does is cybersecurity, and NIST has guidance on securing IoT. So it is, I'd have to look up what the number is, but we could talk afterwards. And also if you go to NIST's website, the other thing is that the Department of Homeland Security has recently published something called cross-sector goals, CPGs. And if you go, those are kind of a number of things that the Department of Homeland Security thinks you should be doing. Those are more general, but they do include IoT.
Yeah.
And so those are two places that I think are very reasonable to start. And ISO, the International Standards Organization, also has IoT guidance.
Yeah,
that you have to buy, it's not that expensive.
And then NHTSA, so National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, that's the guidelines I was referencing. So in construction equipment, a lot of the times we're following the automobile. And so we do have that kind of as an advantage, so we can kind of see what would be coming would be applicable to us.
It is going to be interesting to see what happens really soon, though, because I mean, I think all of you are probably aware of like more robotics that are happening on the job site, more telematics, not just fleet tracking, but like data actually talking to each other, like the equipment talking to each other. Exactly what Teresa was talking about, like that's coming hard and fast, and we don't have a lot of guidelines around that right now. So one of the things we are seeing some of our construction companies do is lean into having a solid backbone in terms of like what does their project management solution look like, so that they can have a holistic point of view for their other technologies, whether it's IoT, whether it's real-time location tracking, whether it's fleet management. So things like Autodesk Construction Cloud, things like other project management solutions out there have really robust APIs now where you can start to see both what's happening on your project in terms of RFIs, submittals, issues, as well as, okay, did that concrete pour show up on time? Is that fleet equipment operating, with the schedule it's supposed to be operating on? So those things are coming closer together. I think we're all just in the waiting game a little bit to build the best practices. But I bet you Teresa has some thoughts.
Yeah, just to echo what my fellow panelists have said up here. So in the report, we talk about how organizations are connecting their IoT devices, what type of network they're using, what type of devices they're using to actually connect. And what we found is that 50% are connecting sort of those traditional laptops, desktop, phone, tablets. But if you kind of look further down in the data, about 30% say, we're looking at autonomous vehicles, meaning drones, planes, cars, rockets. We're looking at robotic machinery. And this is a kind of a 3-year outlook. And so my guess on this is if we look 3 years in the future, we're going to see that flip from sort of those autonomous devices being lower in that list, and in 3 years' time, they'll kind of start to pop to the top. And that's what we're seeing. We're going to release our 2023 research on April 24th. And that's what we're seeing in our 2023 data, is that those endpoints are really starting to change. So we're seeing these purpose-built endpoints come about, and to your point, that's exactly what you were looking at. So we did this report, and then we also have 4 vertical reports that we did, which is derivative works from this report. The closest one to construction is manufacturing. We did manufacturing, healthcare, US SLED, and energy and utilities. But one of the things we talk about here is exactly your question, because there are really, the standards are emerging. What we say is stay involved, make sure that you're future-proofing what you're doing, look to the future, make sure you have those cross-functional communications, and that's really important. In this report, the conference organizers said they would have an electronic copy for everybody. And if you're interested in any of the 4 vertical reports, they're on our website free of charge.
From the software point of view, those IoT devices, we've been, as a company, dealing with IoT devices for many, many years, going all the way back to SCADA systems and working on plants and all sorts of stuff. We provide not only the content that's coming in from those devices, but we also push content out, DTM models that are used in the graders and stuff like that. The most important thing for us, and we had hundreds and hundreds, we worked with Johnson Controls and a bunch of others, there are hundreds of devices, but the main thing from a software point of view is the resiliency, making sure that you're only accepting that content which is supposed to be coming in and actually testing it. So if you've started to get SQL queries that are outside of the parameters that we're designed for, we shut it down. We don't take that. So most of these IoT devices are sending raw data. They're sending JSON packages of temperatures, measurements, something else. If you start to see stuff come through that channel that doesn't meet with it, we just simply don't accept it from a software point of view. We'll shut it down. So I am hoping that there will be some standards out there, but there are so many control devices from so many different companies that handle all sorts of data. What we get from drones is very different than what we get from heat sensors. Very different than what we get from a variable air volume box in a building. So I don't know that we're gonna get to a definitive standard on this is what the data should be, but I think we're gonna get up some guidelines. But from a software point of view, the software has to be designed not to just accept anything that's coming in. It has to be designed with parameters, expecting that something might come in that's aberrant, and if you detect it, you don't accept it.
And that's where API security comes in too.
Yeah, that's a whole
Yeah.
app security.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's worth thinking about, when we're talking about IoT, you might be thinking about, maybe your phone or other devices, but a lot of these are being put into the built environment and are
Yes.
therefore not readily accessible,
Yes.
which creates a really big risk because if something goes wrong, they're not that easy to fix. And also because they don't carry that much compute power, they do not use the same encryption as like your desktop would use. Al, do you want to actually jump in on this?
No, I just was reflecting upon, there's a lot of IoT that's going into concrete, right? There's concrete sensors, there's location sensors, there's temperature sensors, there's water vapor sensors, there's just all of the stuff that we're using, and in fact that all of us rely upon now in our normal construction life cycle. That is what makes it easier for us to do our jobs. And I'm just reflecting on the fact that while it doesn't have as much compute power, we're all using them, it's useful, it's important, and yet there's also this underlying risk around security that we're all dealing with too. So it's this very challenging dichotomy. Yeah, that's all.
I'm looking out for more hands. One in the back, you'll have to speak up.
I'll say this, I'll never discuss a successful attack. Security through obscurity, okay? So if there is a successful attack, I'll never discuss it publicly.
Bravo, that's awesome. One of the things I'll say about that is, in our report, this is coming from the 1,520 global participants. On page 17 of the report, if you download it or get it through the conference organizer, we have a heat map. And this heat map shows the types of attacks that people are most concerned about. Not saying they have had these attacks, but these are the types of attacks they are most concerned about. And across the board, the number one thing people were concerned about in 2022 was being the target of ransomware.
Yep.
And so ransomware is the top attack. And then we have it broken down by vertical market. So we surveyed 6 vertical markets: retail, finance, manufacturing, energy, utilities, US SLED, and healthcare. So we have it broken down by market. And so for manufacturing, for example, the number one type of attack that they are concerned about is an endpoint attack. So, and I'll give you a preview of what we found in 2023. In 2023, we asked this same question: what attack type are you most concerned about? Ransomware not being an attack type, but the outcome. So 2021, we saw the spate of ransomware attacks. So of course, 2021, 2022, people really bolstered their security. They took on things such as security hygiene very seriously. They took on really making sure that they trained their employees about clicking on malicious emails, downloading potentially malicious files, that sort of thing. So for 2023, what we found is that, and think about where we're moving, this goes back to your question about endpoints or IoT devices. Think about where we're moving. We're moving to this connected world with devices. And so the number one attack concern for 2023 was DDoS. So DDoS was number 8 in 2022. So DDoS went from last place to first place in 2023. And if you think about why DDoS attacks are now suddenly something that people are concerned about, is you have more devices out there. So these IoT devices, it's much easier for an adversary to execute an attack of a DDoS attack than to deliver some type of ransomware. So ransomware is very interactive. It's very user interactive. You have to download something, you have to click on something. So these adversaries are now about taking down devices in an environment. So that's the number one concern. Not saying that's the number one type of attack that people have experienced, but that's the number one concern that people are looking at for 2023. So I'd encourage you to read this report, especially page 17. Page 17 just gives you a lot of really good information about where you should be thinking about the types of attacks to protect yourself against. And then download our report on April 24th and see how it's changed.
So I think on the specific question of successful attacks on autonomous systems, it's pretty easy to answer that question, which is we know they're possible from research, right? One question is, what do you mean by autonomous? Do you actually mean like a fully autonomous system, or do you just mean systems that use artificial intelligence to kind of guide you through or make some decisions? But we know from the research that they are vulnerable, and so we all need to kind of manage that risk. On ransomware specifically, there is guidance, right? NIST has the NIST cybersecurity framework, and there is a ransomware profile.
Yeah.
So if you are worried about ransomware, which I think you probably should be at least concerned, right? This is something that you should be thinking about when you're thinking about managing your cybersecurity risk. That's the place to start. Is the ransomware profile.
So in the construction industry, focusing on the product side, on the user, I think the industry is making great strides, especially with cloud, in physically protecting. The thing that keeps me up at night is the bad actor, the Snowdens. The person who's in your network, has authentication, can work on the system, and specifically in the construction industry, there's such a turnover. And it would be very easy for someone to do something aberrant. And having those audit trails, having those logs, but most importantly, having the contractors vet their employees, make sure that they understand the security protocols and the risks, and that they accept the responsibility should they do anything like that, because they will be discovered. We track everything. Autodesk does the same thing.
Yep.
So it's that bad actor that I know what I can do to protect you from the cloud. I don't know what I can do to protect you from your staff. That's the part that concerns me.
Yeah, there's obviously a tension that I think everyone recognizes, which is it will make everyone's job easier if everyone in a company had access to all the data. But it would be terrible for security, right? And so you need to think about limiting that sort of access so you don't have, you're reducing the likelihood of having those sorts of events.
Yeah, it's the behaviors, let's just share a computer, no reason to have separate passwords. I'm gonna create a really weak password because I don't like to remember it. I'm gonna write it down. I'm gonna do something of that nature. And it's that human behavior that we have to be very careful about. And educate people on the job sites that you have to take this seriously.
Looking for more questions, as I have more questions. We've been talking about IoT devices. I'd like to be a little bit more specific and see if people have thoughts on the risks associated with bring your own device. I'm sure some of the folks in here have companies that you might be using your own device in a kind of professional capacity. So any thoughts on security, managing security risk with bring your own device?
The biggest challenge I see with bring your own device is making sure that the organization can load their security protocols properly on it, and that device is actually kept up to date with all the security patches. If it's not on the company network, managed by the company, you might be way out of date. I mean, years ago, we had people running TLS 1.0 for 5 years after it was known as vulnerability. It's that type of stuff that we really have to be careful about, is that those devices are maintained in a corporate sense, not just in the personal sense.
It's actually not something I would personally recommend for most construction firms.
Agreed. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's something, I mean, Autodesk has a bring your own device protocol for ourselves as a software company, but we also have a very robust cybersecurity, very robust product team where we can manage that. That's not necessarily something that most construction firms are going to be able to manage with the level of security that all of you want to manage at. When I was in construction, I worked for a large general contractor, and it was, you used that laptop, you used that iPad, you used the given cell phone on that job, and in fact, sometimes we even locked stuff up at night. And that's another element here of locking down your hardware, and hardware being stolen is a huge issue in construction. And that's actually a very easy entry point for most people when you're thinking about bad actors in this case.
With a bring your own device, oftentimes that device is shared amongst families
Correct.
and friends, where a company computer wouldn't. So
My
it's
kid is
those
on
kind of-
my phone with the YouTube all the time, right? I mean, I'm sure most of you are too.
And we saw that happen at the start of the pandemic in March of 2020. Everybody was sent home, and you saw images of people loading their desktop computers into the trunks of their car. But not everybody had the ability to work from home with a laptop or even to take a desktop home. So you saw people sharing devices, sharing laptops, sharing iPads. So you're doing your work on it part of the day, and then your child is, doing their schoolwork on it for the rest of the day, or the family's watching videos on it at night. So it comes down to the idea of, and as Ali said, having that very, very robust chief information security officer to be able to keep those bring your own devices really secure.
Yeah, that's actually makes me think about kind of like data ownership and where data resides, right? Because if you're in the cloud, other people in your company can then access that. If you're at your house and you put your desktop in the back of your trunk, not only can you not maybe do the patches and updates that you really should be doing, but now you have a problem where you could end up losing, the organization could lose information to a person's desktop. So that seems like something that resonates with you, Emily, as a concern.
It happens, I think. And I think as the construction industry continues to get more digital and moving away from more analog processes, that's something that we're currently wrestling with right now. And the more that you can have an approach of collaboration and control, those two things working together, the better result you're going to get for both your project outcomes as well as your security outcomes.
One of the benefits of moving to the cloud is that your data isn't residing on that computer anymore. That's not the source of it, it's in the cloud. And as the product we manage how much data we cache there and how we clear that out. So even if the device were to be stolen and taken, the data that is on there is going to be highly limited. It will be encrypted at rest, but we tend to clear that data out. Now, that's another balancing point of, we want to remove all the data from the device and keep it in the cloud so that if someone does steal it, but at the same time, the performance is going to come from, I cache some of the data on the computer so it's there next time you access it. And we have to really balance that between what the user wants to experience in terms of performance and what we want with security. And we're opting to be more on the secure side and actually purge those caches regularly so that they're not there should somebody actually physically access the device.
So I want to go back to something, Ryan, that you mentioned earlier, which is, laws, in this case, potentially coming out of the EU, which they will be coming out. And really the question is what will come out and kind of the exact timing. But could you talk about kind of the impact that that's going to have both in Europe, but also, in the US and globally, and how that's going to kind of trickle through? So we've talked a little about security things we should clearly be worried about. Then there's this whole other world of laws and policies that are just going to have direct impact, both on your vendors, but then also on your own businesses. So I'm wondering if you could kind of
Sure.
talk through that.
Yeah, so if we take a look at, say, the equipment itself, architecturally, we'll have to put in some gateways or something like that to really limit access to the data. And that's just so to protect ourselves. As far as the regulations are concerned, one of the key aspects of it is the logging. So we'll have to actually store data on the machines for potential attacks or intrusions into the machinery itself. So it's a question of how much needs to be stored, where is it stored, how long do we have to store it for, and then there's also not complete clarity on retroactiveness. So how does this apply to the product that's already out in the field? Because we have product life for construction equipment that's 10 years, 20 years. So it's out there for a long time. So there's very long-term implications, and that's something that as an OEM or manufacturer, we need to decide what are we going to support, kind of like Windows did with some of their desktop software. What is the life really for our software and what we're going to be able to, support for our customers. Some of the other concerns or potential implications would be, trying to think, besides the logging, that's probably one of the most immediate things right now. But yeah, it's going to have big implications on how we manage that data.
Yeah, and this is one of the things globally. So BSA, we're headquartered in DC, but offices in Singapore and Brussels. And one of the things that we try to think about is how can we harmonize those requirements so that if the EU is requiring logging ABC, the US, if it is going to require logging, requires something like logging ABC, right? So we're not spending our security dollars on compliance costs that's not really driving security. We have a question back there, go for it.
From a construction material supplier standpoint, do you guys address some risks or concerns with e-ticketing from state contracts?
So just so folks heard, it was a question on material supplies and state e-ticketing contracts, right?
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you define e-ticketing?
From Virginia, it's not mandatory at the moment, but pretty soon there will be a third-party contract with the state that would take our information as a supplier and basically replicate that to the state. So no paper transactions, all electronic, whereas now it's a printed ticket.
So it's like an e-commerce.
One-to-one relationship.
Yep.
One-to-one.
Yeah, so we have a software that's called Superload, and it's been in use for many years, and it's for truck drivers to automate their permits. So if they're carrying heavy equipment or oversized equipment, they can automate it. And it follows all the same things we've been talking about. It's cloud-based, we follow the same security protocols. I don't know who the vendor is going to be in Virginia, but I'm sure they're probably thinking along the exact same lines that all of us are.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is I really hope that Virginia has thought about security and is prioritizing that in its procurement of whatever its third-party provider is, because that will be a situation where, right, if you want that contract, you're going to have to use their vendor. And this is a particularly challenging area of cybersecurity, which is supply chain risk management.
Yes.
It is more complex than even just doing cybersecurity in your own organization. And so, you know, ideally they are managing that risk well, and you can rely on them. But it's something that, depending on the information you're providing, you know, like, it is something that your leadership should be thinking about. Again, you might not really have a choice, but at the very least, when you're talking to your state regulators, you should be asking them, what are you doing to secure my information, right? Like, I'm required to give it to you, and I want to see your cybersecurity risk management plan. And if they haven't thought about it, it's something that we should be pushing.
You'd be looking to make sure the organization is SOC 2 compliant or something else along those lines to make sure your data is set up. But ask the question.
Yeah.
I mean, they will and should be able to answer that question for you.
They're probably asking you that question in your procurement process. It's okay for you to ask the question back. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the regulations going on overseas, our biggest challenge from a software point of view is the personal information and those requirements that have come down. Obviously, we have to store some information in order to keep the audit logs, but we don't track personal information, and any personal information is something you can opt out of. But where we're seeing tremendous challenges here is in AI.
Mm-hmm.
There is we have AI ML that runs on photographs to tell you what's in them and indexes them. And one of the discussions and challenges, and we don't know the answer yet, is what is the contractor's requirement going to be when they're taking photos on the site for removing the face of the person, removing the name tag, or removing the license plates of vehicles. There's been discussion that that's going to have to happen, and there's been discussion that we don't know that that's going to have to happen. It's gone back and forth. But you can imagine that if you had to go through every single photo in your organization on a job site and remove people's faces, remove license plates, and personal information, so we're challenged with that. We have a way of doing it. We haven't turned it on because we don't want to enforce it yet.
So we've now talked a little bit about the international piece. I want to stick on that for a second and talk about cross-border data flows. So, you know, obviously people have said and will continue to say that data is the lifeblood of organizations. There's a lot of value that companies can extract from it. But I'm wondering if Allie, you have thoughts on challenges with cross-border data flows, and you know where your priorities might be in that space.
When you say cross-border, do you mean across, what do you mean?
Across national boundaries.
Okay. So I don't really have a strong perspective about this personally, because it's not something I'm hearing a lot from my construction audience and my construction customers today. Just to build upon what Bill was talking about, like Autodesk itself has very rigid, you know, privacy and protection and trust and compliance requirements. We follow GDPR, which is exactly what Bill was talking about in terms of privacy. The larger thing for us that we're seeing around sharing data is all of you will know this already, is like the construction industry is dealing with a situation where you have 50, 100, 1,000 subcontractors on site, and how are you managing the data flow and who owns that IP on any given project? Every single construction firm I'm talking to right now wants to own their own data. So does every sub, so does every architect, so does every owner. So managing protocols around that have become very difficult, especially when for most firms that are trying to use and leverage more KPI and benchmarking, you need access to your data in order to have the historical record in order to predict what could happen in the future or figure out what your KPIs and your benchmarks should be. We're helping to solve this in a couple different ways. Specifically, we actually have a technology called Autodesk Bridge, which is the ability to share data while also retaining your own IP and give access to your core stakeholders, bring them into your instance, or share your instance with others in a way that allows you to both collaborate and control. I know that sounds pretty vague, but you can come talk to the team a little bit more about it at our booth. But again, this notion of being able to share data amongst stakeholders, that's the biggest driver we're seeing right now in the construction space.
I will real quick just say, I've been told that Autodesk's booth has beer in the afternoon,
Yeah.
so, +1. And also, I can say,
And
this
we have
is
the hangover
teamwork.
kids.
Yeah,
It's
Bentley has the
teamwork,
hangover cure, so you get.
Perfect. We'll help you out, they'll help you out too.
That's right.
So in data residency, from the software design point of view, it's where that data physically resides in the cloud. So the first time we had a real major challenge with this is with the Patriot Act. When the Patriot Act went into effect, it basically said the US government could reach in and basically look at anybody's data. Canada's reaction was visceral. They said absolutely no data can be resided for any projects that are being worked on in Canada in the United States. Now, unfortunately, we had just finished building out a data center in Detroit to service Canada, which we couldn't use anymore. So we ended up having to move it. Since that point, there have been many other states, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, and places like that, that demand that their data be in country.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it can't be accessed from outside the country, but the residency of the data, where it's stored, has to be in country. And for that reason, Autodesk and Bentley and many of your cloud providers will, when you're setting up your project, you will actually pick the country of origin for where that data center is going to be. Because there are many data centers across the globe. It's an important thing. You pick it not only for the requirements of your project, but you pick it also for the performance. You want to make sure that people are able to access it. But that means that a multinational company is going to have to consider that when they're thinking about setting up their projects and where they're actually going to house their data, and more importantly, where are they backing up their data? Because you can't back that data up outside that country boundary either. It means the data residency has to be in that country.
So I think we've talked a bunch about cybersecurity and a number of challenges, talked about kind of benefits of cloud and maybe some risks. But wondering if we could also talk about, I don't know if we want to call it the present or the future, which is 5G. And you talked about, maybe you could share some of your thoughts, again, about some of the new risks that are associated with 5G, but also some of the benefits that have actually been built in to fifth generation wireless networks.
Yeah, so one of the things we found out in our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report is that people say as they're moving to the edge, their preferred network is going to be private 5G cellular network. And I think that's no surprise given the type of work that you're seeing this edge ecosystem actually do. So if you think about 5G, 5G is more secure than any previous generation of network. It's been built from the ground up with more inherent security. So from a network perspective, it is more secure than any previous generation of network built in. But what you have to do as the user of that network, you have to make sure that you are protecting what is connected to that network. So what you own, your data, as we were just talking about, your applications, and your endpoints. So you have to make sure that you're securing all of those things, the data, the applications, and the endpoints. And this is very, very similar to where we were probably about 10 years ago or so with cloud. So when cloud first came out, everybody said, oh, I'm putting my application in the cloud. I don't need to worry about the security of my application. My favorite cloud provider is going to do that. And we saw how that turned out. So what we saw then probably about 10 years ago was this call for a shared responsibility model. And that's one of the things we've written about in our research in 2019, 2020, 2021, is this idea of a shared responsibility model as you start to bring in these new 5G types of networks. Because you're saying, yeah, the network's secure, but realize you have to be responsible for connecting the endpoints, all the operating systems that drive those endpoints, whether they are off the shelf or whether they are purpose-built for some type of device that you're using. You have to worry about protecting and securing your applications. The network is not going to protect and secure that application. You have to build that in through your application security, through API security, through this concept of DevSecOps or SecDevOps, whatever portmanteau you like to use. And then you also have to worry about connecting securing that data. And that data is really the lifeblood of what is going on, as we were just talking about. So this idea of data lifecycle security is going to become critically important, and we're already starting to see that. So make sure that you understand how you're protecting and securing the data, the applications, and the endpoints that you're putting on any network.
I think we've actually run over because I wasn't so great at checking the time. Couple things to close. We've heard about a couple reports that you should definitely read from AT&T. We also do have the Digital Transformation Construction Report, which is about helping build a better future. They're available outside, also excellent reading. I think we basically covered it all. I'm more than happy to stick around and ask questions or answer questions about cybersecurity or anything else. No question is too silly or basic.